Call me sentimental. Call me merciful, said Curze distractedly. Elver resolved never, ever to call Curze either of those things. But it is, as you said, a long journey. I require company, entertainment, or I should become bored. Elver wanted anything else in the universe other than that thing becoming bored. Will you do as I bid? Curze continued. Or do you wish to share the fate of your traveling companions here? I will sail for you, Lord. I will serve you. Good. Exerting minimal effort, Curze broke Elver's chains from the throne, but left them wrapped around his ankles, wrists, and neck. Get on with it then. Curze hunched lower, not so much to avoid the human height ceilings, but because it seemed the posture was comfortable to him. He hummed a jarringly jaunty tune as he headed for the door to the main spinal corridor. Elver blinked in disbelief. A slaughterhouse ship was his to command. He felt an angry throbbing in his left hand. He looked at it, afraid of what he might see, and was justified in being so, finding filthy bandages wrapped around the place his two smallest fingers should be. Blood, his own blood, was frozen to the throne arm in brilliant red icicles. His head spun. He half expected to wake, sweating in his bunk. He knew he never would. There was no escaping this nightmare. My lord, he asked, what happened to my hand? Curze turned back and gave a grin that froze the blood in Elver's veins. I became bored. The crew of the Sheldrune thought they'd be rich. The freighter had stumbled upon a sarcophagus that was almost certain to contain valuable archaeotech. There was a lot of it scattered around since Horus's rebellion had been quashed. Elver had voiced his deep suspicion when they found it, saying they should leave it, but Captain Overton, fueled by greed, ordered the ship to intercept the salvage. After 2 days of work, the immense sarcophagus was brought into the catch bay. The quartermaster confirmed it contained a functional stasis field powered by a grade 15 compact plasma reactor. But when they got a look inside, they saw a huge, pale figure. He had dark, lank hair and a spiteful snarl. Elver instinctively hated him. He's a Primarch, he whispered. The Primarchs, sons of the Emperor. They were not merely towering giants of men, but shining paladins, forged from divine potential to lead humanity to its golden zenith. These paragons of speed, strength, and genius were meant to be the ultimate expression of the Emperor's grand design. Their majesty so intense, mortals would weep at the sight of them. But the promise was broken. The perfection was shattered. This man in the pod, this thing, had been designated Traitoris Extremis. He had cast his lot against his father, against the Imperium of Man, with the arch-traitor Horus. And in Konrad Curze, who had long been consumed by the darkness of his own terrible precognitive visions, all that divine might, all that would-be brilliance was twisted into pure, focused, insane devastation. The crew of the Sheldrune stood no chance. He tortured and killed them all, and enjoyed doing so. In the eyes of this monster, who styled himself as the Dark King or the Night Haunter, they were all guilty anyway. Elver survived the initial hunt by hiding in ventilation tubes, a skill he had developed previously to avoid his captain's abuse. Elver had been sight-touched, and his dreams would sometimes become reality. Perhaps that played a role in why he was the last crew member alive. But the Night Haunter always gets his prey. Elver tried to run, but he was no match. Foolish mortal. When he awoke, he had been chained to the captain's command throne, and Curze offered him a reprieve. He would survive if he would pilot the ship to the planet Seguausa. And know that the Dark King did not make this offer out of necessity, for he was indeed a son of the Emperor, and nothing was beyond his skill. The Night Haunter had grown to maturity on Nostramo, alone for many years. As his own prophesied death drew near, he sought company, and entertainment. Having accepted this monstrous deal, Elver's 4-year journey and torment now began. Giants clad in armor the color of midnight storms crowded him, each so huge he felt small as a rat. Dust raced through a chill atmosphere, stinging his skin, scratching his eyes. Konrad Curze looked at him for one last time, and Elver saw he did not care at all what happened to him. Dozens of pairs of slanted ruby eyes shone their malevolence upon Elver. "My lord!" he cried. An armored hand reached for him. Gentle trilling woke Elver from his troubled sleep, not that he experienced any other kind. He rolled over, his single eye bleary, the numbers on the chronograph swimming in his vision. In primitive digital sticks of green, the chronograph displayed the time and the subjective date. Neither of these measurements were as important as the third set of data, a countdown ticking towards 0. He stared at it, not believing that after so long, it was nearing the end. "It's time," he said. He rubbed his left hand over his face. It had taken him a long time to get used to doing that with his left rather than his right. Scars ran down his cheeks from the time he'd forgotten the augmetic claw Curze had given him. He groaned and sat at the edge of the bed. There was recaf to be drunk and a long day ahead. But first, a small moment of contemplation. This was a momentous occasion, long in coming. The time had come to prep the ship for deceleration. It took him 3 attempts to stand. Curze's boredom had cost Elver dearly. In the years since his arrival, Curze had taken 3 more of Elver's fingers, the lower half of his left leg. Not all of it gone in one easy session, but nibbled away, centimeter by centimeter over months. Curze had torn out Elver's right eye in a night of terror that still made him want to scream. A smooth patch of skin crossed by an ugly puckered scar covered over the socket. The worst injury was to Elver's right arm. That was the one that had nearly killed him. One evening, Curze had pounced on him without warning, borne him away, and, tittering madly, had peeled the skin from his forearm and hand with such agonizing slowness that Elver begged him to rip it off in one go and get it over with. Curze had left him a bloody heap. He'd contracted an infection shortly after and nearly died. When the Primarch returned, it was to save him. Elver's simpering gratitude for the crude augmetic Curze replaced his arm with shocked him. He came closest to becoming a sniveling cur at that point. Afterwards, he expected to break, waited for it, but it never happened. Under pressure, part of Elver's being compressed into a small cold diamond, and this place of strength became a harbor for his sanity. As bad as things got, he never went mad, he never broke. He prided himself on that, and Curze seemed to respect him for it. An equilibrium of sorts was struck between defiance and deference, between terror and Elver's determination to survive. There was no other way to be. There was nowhere to hide. Curze could hear Elver's heart from the other end of the vessel. He could taste his fear on the air. The multiple locks and bars Elver put on his door were little barrier to the Primarch's strength, but he used them anyway. Elver reflected on these things as he limped through the Sheldrune. Without maintenance from Overton's piratical crew, the ship had suffered. A lot of things that he needed to do could no longer be controlled from the command deck. He was prepared for a long day. As he worked, he waited for Curze to appear and butcher another part of his body. Respect did not stop the Primarch. He couldn't help himself. Curze paid no attention to Elver's pleas or his tears, not when the darkness was on him. But after each session of abuse, he would treat Elver as if nothing had happened. Sometimes he would spend time with Elver and instruct him in various matters. In those rare days, Elver glimpsed the regal being beneath the filth. Elver's world expanded under his tutelage, even as on other occasions his body was whittled away, knife stroke by knife stroke. For much of the voyage, Elver never saw Curze. Weeks could go by when he had no idea where the Primarch was lurking. Occasionally, he found evidence of the Primarch's presence. One time, he came across 100 rats crucified on tiny crosses, each one's abdominal cavity carefully opened and pinned back. Several were still alive, their tiny hearts twitching. The amount of work Curze must have done to create this macabre display chilled him more than anything. Against this background of fear, Elver attempted to do his duties as best he could, until, in the end, terror became mundane. He reached a switchboard for the starboard thruster array. The remote system to set the ship for directional change had burned out, and he'd had to wire in the controls directly. He checked his makeshift repairs to the activation circuit. It looked like it still worked. If it didn't, then the thrusters wouldn't fire to flip the ugly freighter around, and they'd carry on their merry way forever. He closed the box door. He missed Curze when he was absent. Throughout the pain and the boredom, the Sheldrune coasted on towards Seguausa. It ran quietly, its halls host to nothing but ghosts and rats creeping up from the bilges, its lumens dimming and dying one by one. Elver limped painfully to the enginarium. The arm was the only gift Curze gave him. His stolen leg was replaced by a simple peg of metal he'd had to make himself. It had amused Curze to shorten his leg further, so it never fit right. Elver was no metalsmith, and his leg was uncomfortable, its cup socket chafing perpetually at his stump. Simple freighters like the Sheldrune lacked the giant propulsive units and the reactors to power them that mightier craft possessed, relying for the most part on inertia. Nevertheless, the energy required to accelerate to its top speed was considerable, as was that required to slow back down. Elver had waited for this moment for 20 months, looking forward so much to the break in his monotonous existence that it had become something of an obsession. Turning over such a long and cumbersome ship was a technically challenging exercise, especially when undertaken alone. Elver grunted, then went around the bridge priming switches and rerouting key controls to the command throne. He hauled himself over and sat down. Fragments of the chains with which Curze had bound him to the seat still hung there. The blood of the crew still clung blackly to the deck years later, now reduced to a kind of tar. Once he'd got the heat back on in there, it had rotted slowly, stinking the place out for weeks. Only stains remained of human life. He didn't even notice them anymore. He pulled the brass keyboard over his lap and activated the control systems. Everything was ready. He looked behind him, half expecting the Primarch's abyssal eyes to glitter in the gloom there. But there was no sign of him. Elver was disappointed. "Activate," he said to no one, and activated the attitudinal thrusters. A growing pressure pushed down on him as the ship swung about on its axis. "No going back now," he muttered. Moments of crisis came and went, each headed off before it became disaster. Adrenaline granted him speed and focus. Once the ship was turned, he spooled up the main drive and ignited its plasma jets. The final act went unexpectedly smoothly. Before he knew it, they were slowing down. It was inevitable that Elver would feel a sense of anticlimax. All his effort and his hard-won expertise were applied successfully. Now it was done. Even the change in the ship's noises, vibrating and rumbling with distant engine roar after years of silence, was a novelty for only a few moments before it became the new constant. Months stretched ahead, months of waiting for Curze to strike, or to come speak with him, equally terrifying experiences. And then what? Elver shuddered. He left the bridge in a hurry and barricaded himself in his room. There he picked up the bottle of rough spirits he'd been saving for the day and drank it all without a shred of celebration. Finally, Seguausa lay before them. Elver looked at it through the scratched observation blister, the sole window anywhere on the whole of the Sheldrune outside of the airlocks. His manically grinning face reflected off the inside. He was a disheveled lunatic, he thought, and so what? To get there, he'd had to prove himself with the education Overton had singularly failed to give, and so much more besides. He was now a capable engineer, astrogator, pilot, and captain. "I'm a one-man crew," he said to himself proudly. The cost of his expertise stared back at him. His face, never pretty, was ruined. The prize his efforts had won him was not much to look at either. Seguausa was the ugliest planet he had ever seen, and all he had ever seen were ugly worlds. A sphere whose color palette extended solely to various hues of grey. Continental plates frozen by long inactivity scabbed the edges of dust seas. The sun was small, white, and warmthless. Grey, white, and black, the view was a universe bled of all life. A reflected face appeared next to his. Huge and inhuman, pale and colorless as the scene on the other side of the armor-glass blister. Dark hair cut Curze's face into ragged stripes. Black holes stared where the glint of soul light should shine. Elver's grin became a rictus. His heart leapt in his chest. "Seguausa," said Konrad Curze, "you have done well." "What now, my lord?" "We land," said Curze. "Prepare the ship's shuttle." The Primarch departed as soundlessly as he had arrived. Their shuttle's descent into Seguausa was not a flight, but a terrifying plummet, a harrowing nest of survival against a malicious unseen foe, the planet itself. Elver, hopelessly outmatched by the furious tearing winds, wrestled a ship that buckled and swerved with a life of its own, alarms shrieking a frantic chorus of impending doom. Blinded by rising storm and battered by an atmosphere that refused passage, his hands slipped on the controls that felt suddenly malevolent. All the while, the nightmare figure of Konrad Curze sat unmoved in the cabin's gloom. His silent, unblinking glare reflected a chilling indifference to the violent spiral towards the unforgiving surface. The final bone-jarring impact was a deafening crash that tore through Elver, a brutal greeting from the hard rocks below, leaving him momentarily lost to the blackness, only to awaken to the unnerving silence of a gale-swept grey tomb, alive but deeply aware that his near-fatal struggle was merely the prelude to whatever horror awaited them. "I did it!" For the second time that day, a crazed grin split his face. He looked around for the Primarch. The cockpit door was open onto the small cargo bay. Curze was approaching the ramp release. Elver looked at the dust storm alarm. He needed protective equipment, goggles at least, and a respirator. Dust like that would shred his lungs. "My lord, please, wait!" Elver struggled to release his restraints before staggering up from his pilot's seat. His neck twinged mightily, his head ached. The ship rocked on its landing claws in the storm. "My lord, please, I need to prepare." Curze turned to regard him silently, his hand hovering over the button. Elver pulled himself through the door, half throwing himself at the supply locker. He dragged out his breathing kit and shrugged the purification tanks onto his back. He had no time to pull on the coat he'd brought down from orbit. "We are home," said Curze. "I am going out." His hand descended towards the switch. "Wait!" shouted Elver, gasping. He struggled his backpack on, twisting knobs to activate it. He couldn't run the checks he should. He was trying to catch the respirator mouthpiece swinging on its rubber tube when Curze opened the door and let Seguausa within the ship. Barely had the door opened a crack before talcum-fine dust blasted into Elver's face, drying out his throat and mouth instantaneously, and cutting at his innards with razor edges. He tugged on his respirator. Like all his equipment, it was a composite piece salvaged from the best components on the Sheldrune. Even with a crew's complement to choose from, it was still little better than mediocre. As the ramp descended further, larger pieces of debris came in, borne on a wind that slapped at Elver's face. He screwed up his remaining eye, knowing that to look into that wind was to ruin his cornea and lose what little sight remained to him. By the time he'd got his goggles on and blinked the grit from his streaming eye, Curze was already walking down the ramp onto the murderous surface, slow and stately as a ghost attending his own funeral. "My lord!" Elver shouted, but the rubber plastic of his mask muzzled him, absorbing his words and turning them into risible honk. "My lord!" Curze walked through the wind without trouble, erect as a statue, his cloak wrapped around him, tight as a winding sheet. Elver struggled against the raw strength of the storm, as the whole planet seemed to exert itself against him. His leg stump ached furiously as he set his crude prosthetic against the deck and leaned hard into the gale. Dust whirled the shutter interior. The wind tore up anything not strapped down. Elver experienced an appalling panic that he would not see Konrad Curze again, that he would go out into the storm and be lost. Curze was a monster, his tormentor, but there was a strange bond between them. At the same time, the seductive whisper of freedom enticed him. He could shut the door, deny the wind, fly away to the Sheldrune, and make all speed for whatever system he could find. The nearest was 10 years sailing, but there were enough supplies aboard to last him. He would be the master of his own vessel. Still young, he could raise a crew, sell off the cargo, and ply a new route between fresh stars. In a few years, he might even be able to afford new augmetics to repair the damage Curze had inflicted. Curze. He hesitated. The Primarch was lost to sight behind the wind, and its merciless cargo of sand. He had moments to decide. Freedom or horror? For all his defiance, he knew freedom was a lie. The very concept was absurd. He had been a slave. Now he was a slave to a different man. In a galaxy of unfree men, a slave must define himself by his master. He served death itself. What more powerful lord could there be? "My lord!" he shouted, staggering into the storm. "Wait! Wait, my lord!" Deadly cold tore into him with every bit as much force as the wind. He staggered forwards. It was too late to return for his coat. Curze was a pillar of night in the grey of Sagwausa's permanent twilight. Elver hurried after him, struggling against the weather where the Primarch seemed to drift serenely through it. The slow pursuit continued for an hour. Elver lost feeling in his limbs. Grit got into his augmetic arm, causing it to malfunction. More gathered in the cup of his peg leg, tearing the scars of his stump. Still, he pushed himself on. Gradually, the storm spent its fury, dropping by degree, until the wind was gone completely, and Elver was walking through a stilled world where fine particulate floated in the air, and the only noise was the rasp of his breath in his respirator mask. Curze stayed the same distance ahead, never drawing away, never nearing. He saw now that the Primarch waited when he dropped too far behind, until Elver gained a little ground, then moved on ahead. A blackness emerged from the gritty fog. At first, Elver took it to be a mountain, but it was far mightier than that. The dusty air parted, giving up a huge building. Black stone that remained at a high polish despite the weather. A small patch of white near the horizon showed the position of the sun. The glow of this pathetic sunset caught on battlements and mighty portals and windows filled with fine stonework and finer glass. The Primarch stopped before a yawning gateway set into a curtain wall 100 meters high. Elver doubled his pace and with great weariness joined his tormentor. "My house," said Konrad Curze, though the word did no justice to so immense an abode. By then much closer, Elver saw that the palace was unfinished. Many doors and windows were empty holes. The upper reaches ended in reinforcement spikes, awaiting higher stories. Not only unfinished, he thought, but abandoned. Construction equipment and pallets of materials hid beneath dunes heaped around the wall's foot, their tarpaulins ripped by years of storms. Coverings for scaffoldings hung in limp flags. There was no soul abroad beside the two of them, no life of any kind. "Now we wait," said Curze. "For what?" asked Elver. "For whom?" Curze said. "For my sons." The silence of this desolate world was finally shattered by the arrival of the faithful. They came in dribs and drabs, heralded by the roaring of gunships and the eerie snap of electrostatic charge. The thick, dusty air of Sagwausa seemed reluctant to let them land. The first group emerged from the dusty night, armored giants who towered over Elver. Their helm lenses glowed like ruby eyes. These warriors were, perhaps, more terrifying than their Primarch. They were not mad, but followed their lord's despicable example freely. "Soul Hunter," said Curze. Their leader knelt in the dust, followed by his fellows. "Night Hunter," said the warrior. "You came." For the only time, Elver saw him smile at his warriors. "I foresaw your return, my lord." The Soul Hunter angled his helm upwards. "We heard your call. We are your loyal sons. We are here." The Primarch did not indulge his sons, the Night Lords, for long. "Horus lost," said a legionary. Curze gave his sons a pitying look. "As was ordained," he said. "Do you believe it could have been any other way?" The killer was angry at the reply, and turned his head away. More of the giants were emerging from the dusty night. "You are the first to come. Many more will follow. All of you have fought and are exhausted. I have endured events beyond your understanding. In that time, I have had my faith tested by demons and brothers alike. I return from the dead for but a while." "Don't speak so, Lord," said Talos. "Time may tell a different story." "Fate is fixed," Curze said. "The path of events cannot be changed. Horus was always going to lose. I am going to die. When I am gone, you will take the truth to the stars and tear down the edifice of lies built by my father. Until then," he looked up at half-finished walls of the palace, "we shall build a fastness, the likes of which has never been seen, within chambers furnished by the nightmares of better men. There I shall write my scripture of despair, the great antidote to the hope which plagues our species." Some energy fled along with the words. He turned from his sons then. Elver unwittingly caught his gaze, and, perhaps due to Elver's hidden psychic gift, a flash of understanding passed between them. Elver drank in knowledge unfiltered, comprehending suddenly and completely that Curze only half believed what he said. You fear you are wrong," whispered Elver. He couldn't help himself. He knew the moment he said it, he was doomed. Curze's body language became dangerous, prompting a question from one of his men. "What of him, my lord? What of your slave?" Curze held Elver's eye. Black, pointed teeth showed between Curze's parted lips. "I am done with him, Captain Vandred. Dispose of him as you wish." Dozens of pairs of slanted ruby eyes shone their malevolence upon Elver. "My lord!" Elver cried. And finally, just as he had foreseen, an armored hand came for him. So it was, the tale of Elver, the man who saw through Konrad Curze, was ended.